In your memory just might fade. I wait a minute for the sun to rise. Yeah, she got the best of me this time. The nights alone have got me petrified. You're keeping me up, you're seeing me through. It's like you're my nightlight. I wait a minute for the sun to shine. I guess she made the best of me this time. The nights alone have got me petrified. You're keeping me up, you're seeing me through. It's like you're my nightlight. Did they give you a license to turn back all the clocks in town and you're showing up timeless right on cue?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Leadership of the Head, Heart, and Hand at the Fair Education Impact Festival. My name is Gina Cicerone, and I am the co-CEO of the Fair Education Alliance. And I'm really excited that I'm here with Sam, my co-CEO, and we're actually doing this session together as support for Liz Robinson and Ellie Lister from Big Education, who are going to be taking you through the Big Education Leadership Wheel and how we can apply that to our own leadership over the course of the next hour and 15 minutes. So we are at the Fair Education Impact Festival. To kick us off, hopefully the chat has been buzzing as you have been introducing yourselves to each other and what you're hoping to get out of today. Just for context, really excited that we have Big Education here to share, who I know also are very aligned with our vision that no child's educational success is limited by their socioeconomic background. They're actually a member of the FEA, one of our 230 members that we have from across the education, third sector, and business communities. And we're going to be talking about the Big Leadership Adventure, but also just so you are aware, we have the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Awards open right now. So if you are an FEA member and you're looking to develop an internal innovation, it could be a new product, program, initiative, partnership with another FEA member, then this award is for you, giving you £15,000 salary contribution to go full-time on this for a period of 6 months and a year of support. And likewise, we have our Innovation Award, which is open to the public for anybody who has an idea to make education fair. You can see the sessions that are coming up next week to hear from our current portfolio and from our heads of the awards, Tish and Cheyenne. So today, we have a few of us, of course, in the room. We're going to get to know each other very well, but would also encourage you to take this further than these Zoom walls. So you can shout on social with #ImpactFestival and @_the FEA. And this is one of our 40 sessions that we have over the course of these 2 weeks, with about 20 more next week. So do check out the timetable to be able to book in all of the sessions and the attendee list as well, so you can email and connect with others who perhaps you haven't met over the course of the week already. So I mentioned that we have Liz and Ellie here, and we're going to delve straight into leadership. So what we'd like you to do to start off is, if you can, answer the question, which is, how has your leadership gotten bigger through the pandemic experience? So we're going to have that in the chat. And if you can consider that around your leadership overall, and we'll be breaking you out into small groups just to kick this off and be bringing you back in just over 4 minutes or so. So introduce yourself and your organization, but then dive right into how has your leadership gotten bigger over the course of the pandemic. And then we'll come back and Liz and Ellie will be taking us through the rest of the session. So over to you and your breakouts. Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had fruitful discussions about your leadership. So I will now hand over to Liz and Ellie, but not with a few words beforehand. So today we're going to be exploring the big leadership wheel. Oh, my amazing Zoom virtual background impedes your ability to see it. I have mine there. I'm just so you know, and happy to chat about this over the course of today. One of the reasons we were so keen to have Liz and Ellie run a session is because I have had the absolute honor of taking part in their first cohort of the Big Leadership Adventure, which is open for applications until the 3rd of May. And I highly recommend this if you are considering how you want to develop your leadership within the education space, challenge your own assumptions about what education can look like, network with a whole host of senior leaders, both in terms of the school settings, but also different social enterprises, and really just challenge your own assumptions that you have about yourself as a leader and grow. So I know it's really helped, and hopefully Sam will nod, really helped my own leadership within the FEA as a secretariat and as an alliance. But really, I want to open that to you and find out more over the course of today. So Liz and Ellie, thank you for that opportunity, and thank you so much for being here today. Over to you both.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you for your lovely words about the programme. So my name's Ellie. I am the programme lead for the Big Leadership Adventure, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all today to give you an insight into a very quick insight into what it's like to be part of the programme. Before we start, I'd love to get some initial reflections from the group on how your leadership has maybe changed or got bigger during this period. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and come in.
Hi, I don't mind speaking. So we spent a lot of time on introductions actually, so didn't quite get around to it. But I'm Jodie, I'm from Kalisa, and I was reflecting on, I moved organisations in the pandemic. I originally worked with high risk young people in residentials, and then moved across to Kalisa, which works in schools and prisons. And in both organisations, I found I had to think very strategically about the future and the direction of the organisation, and what we had to change and what we had to compromise in order to be flexible to the changing needs with COVID, but also think about the needs of the staff team in terms of their well-being, particularly if they're working in high-risk environments and still having to do face-to-face delivery as well.
Thanks for sharing, Jodie. So there was lots of adapting and lots of change, and also what I heard there was you thinking about multiple different stakeholders in all of this as well, and having to manage all of that. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to come in and share? Ben, I thought we had quite an interesting conversation in our breakout room, and if you would be happy to share, I'd love for the group to hear that.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Ben from Impetus. Basically, I don't think I was doing any leadership before the pandemic. I'd sort of just started line managing someone, but over the course of the last year, I've kind of line managed more people. I've had to do some recruitment. We've been involved in setting up the national tutoring program, so we've been kind of building a thing. And I definitely feel like, whereas a year ago I was not a leader, now I sort of am a leader, and I've never really stopped to think about that or get the skills you need to do it well. So yeah, hoping for lots of lessons from today's session.
Thanks so much, Ben, and thank you for your openness in our breakout room and in the main space. Jo, did you want to come in? I think you may have.
Yeah, I did unmute myself, didn't I? I gave myself away there. Hi, I'm Jo. I'm the head of programs and impact at Envision, and we were just talking in our breakout room. I was saying that I actually matrix manage our program managers across all 3 of our regions. So we work in London, Bristol and Birmingham, and on the one hand, kind of the pandemic allowed me to have much more, make it much more of a collective kind of and cohesive team where we kind of could all work together through Teams and through Zoom and whatever weekly. But the thing that's obviously really been missing is that social interaction and just getting to know people through a screen rather than being able to kind of build up those managerial relationships in person. And I've really felt the impact of not being able just to have that kind of chat in the coffee room rather than a really kind of structured meeting with the people I manage. So yeah, I'm just really interested to kind of hear any tips and tricks on how to keep that a positive leadership relationship.
Thanks so much. So yeah, navigating the fact that everybody is all over the country and we've been through a screen for the last year. Thanks for sharing, Jo. Well, thank you for those reflections. I'll hand over to Liz now. If you're there, Liz, I think I can see you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. My name's Liz Robinson. I'm the co-director of Big Education. I'll tell you a bit more about who we are and what we do. My background is that in primary education, I was a head teacher for a long time in a school in South East London in Walworth, and moved to create Big Education 2.5 years ago because we want to change the system. And so Peter Hyman and I, who's my co-director and founder of School 21, decided that we should pool our efforts and think together about how we could best leverage influence to try and bring about the changes that we believe in. So it's great to be here. And leadership, the punchline of my presentation is that the answer is always leadership. But you knew that because that was the session you signed up for. So Ellie, thank you. You're going to share them. Remote screen sharing and next sliding. Here we go. So a little bit about Big Education. Thanks, Ellie. You're part of Fair Education Alliance because you believe in a shared set of values and expectations, particularly around disadvantage and the fact that the system fails systematically children from disadvantaged backgrounds with various degrees of protected characteristics around how that affects particular groups. But we have a system that doesn't work for a third of students. We have a system at GCSE which fails a third of students despite the 100 billion that we spend on education up to the age of 16. Norm-referenced GCSEs mean that a proportion of students always fail, and we all live in that system. We accept that as the status quo. So as Big Education, we sit with many of the issues that many of you will experience and are trying to mitigate and make up for in our system. A narrow curriculum, one focused on a certain set of outcomes. So our work as Big Education is threefold. Firstly, it's about trying to inspire people with this story. So this slide is about trying to give a compelling narrative to an alternative view of what school and education can look like. So paradigm A, and here's our paradigm A school and our paradigm B school over there. And we've tried to conceptualize this sense of the change we want to see through thinking about these two typical paradigm schools. So what's a paradigm A school like? Well, its purpose is to get students into Russell Group universities. Arguably, our entire system is geared towards making the life of university admissions tutors easier by having a set of credentials and metrics which make it easy for them to sort out the brightest and the best of who will get into the top university places. And so if that's that's a bit of a characterization, but arguably that is how we're geared. So if that's the purpose, what follows from that is then a curriculum. So what do we then teach? Well, we teach a knowledge-based curriculum that enables universities to have the level of expert knowledge that they require for an academic post-18 education. So what kind of pedagogy does that curriculum then require? Well, we've got to a position where a direct instruction, changes in long-term memory are deemed to be what successful learning is, because if that's what you need in order to take that expert knowledge up into your university education. So direct instruction with a focus on knowledge acquisition becomes the pedagogy that's prized above all others. What does that mean for assessment? Well, exams are a perfectly valid way of assessing whether you've acquired that knowledge. So exams are the currency of how we assess that. What does that mean for student agency and student culture within a school? Well, it means that the power is with the teacher, because the teacher is the expert and the child is a passive recipient. Slightly parodying there, but a child is there to learn from the teacher the expert knowledge that they hold as the expert practitioner. They are there to receive that, and so they have that's the dynamic set up between the relationship between the teachers and the students. that's a pretty passive position, and it's pretty boring and it's pretty disengaged. So in order to control the students to do that, we have these very heavy compliance cultures, which mean that students have to adhere to those protocols and those rules and those expectations, and it's quite a punitive system if they don't adhere to it. So the student is a part of this organisation in a fairly passive way. How do we know that schools are doing that? Well, then we have league tables to show how well the schools are doing on delivering on that particular metric, and we have Ofsted that comes in and makes a judgment about a school based on a framework that prioritises the things that we've just set out in that paradigm A education. What does that mean for leadership? It leads to the current parlance, the current trend, which is about the knowledge you need to lead. It's about expertise, it's about a managerial style, it's about people at the top having the expert knowledge and that being implemented through the organisation, because leaders know the solutions, leaders know what needs to be done, they have the expert knowledge, and the job of other people in the organisation is to implement that with rigour. Okay, so that's paradigm A. We believe there are fundamental issues with that model at every single level, starting from the very top, which, as I started out talking about, what's the purpose of school? So we fundamentally believe, and interestingly, most people I speak to, be them educators, parents, people in business, third sector, human beings, agree that school should be about more than just a set of academic outcomes. And I suspect that I'm definitely preaching to the choir in this group of people here. So if we start from a different premise, that the purpose of school is about something broader, you know, to thrive in work and life, as Big Change would articulate it, there's lots of ways of thinking about it, but something more expansive, fulfilling your potential, being empowered to change the world, an expansive view of what the purpose of school is. Now, we certainly hold that purpose to be, we certainly hold that there is a more expansive purpose to education. If you start from that premise, you can then create, thank you for the here, thanks Rosie, a logic chain, just as the paradigm A has got a very coherent, the knowledge gang has got a very coherent logic chain. If that's the purpose, well, that makes sense that that's the curriculum and that's the pedagogy you need. But if you start from a different purpose, you need a different curriculum. So you need a more expansive curriculum, one we talk about as the head, heart and hand, which I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment, and which covers a much more expansive sense of what the child's experience are. If you have a more expansive curriculum, you therefore need a different range of pedagogies, because the way to teach young people about who they are as a person, their identity, their place in the world, is not through direct instruction. So you get to a position of needing a repertoire of pedagogies, and teachers being skilled, teachers and other members of staff in school being skilled practitioners who select from a range of techniques based on what the learning is that they're trying to achieve for those particular young people. Then we get on to assessment. Well, how do we assess some of those skills and competencies? If you're interested in that and you haven't yet seen it, please do engage with the work we're involved in, which is rethinkingassessment.com, which is an alliance of strategic organisations, a strategic alliance of organisations, I should say, trying to wrestle with and crack the big, enormous egg that is assessment. It's such a barrier, it's such a stranglehold on the system. It's also nonsense to say that you can't assess some of these broader skills and aptitudes. Thank you, Sam. So what happens when you leave school, if for almost any vocational course, certainly into a professional organisation, you will be put through a battery of skills and aptitudes tests, which test our ability, where they test the things that those organisations care about, and they've invested billions across the sector in developing very good tools for assessing the ability to work in teams, creativity, resilience and problem solving, because those are things they care about. So it's just not true that tools don't exist to assess some of these wider skills and competencies. It's just that we don't use them in schools. We have a mismatch between what organisations, businesses and employers want and what schools deliver. There's a total disconnect, and we are absolutely myopic and obsessed at the moment with there only being one way of measuring one particular part. So that's assessment. The next bit of the logic chain is about student relationships and culture, and how behaviour and engagement is managed in schools. And if you start with a more expansive curriculum, a different suite of pedagogies, that is underpinned by a fundamentally different relationship, which is based on mutuality. It's based on a more child-centred approach, and knowing that children bring into the school skills, attitudes, mindsets and capabilities which enrich the experience, rather than all the expertise existing in the institution before they get there. So then what does that mean for leadership? Well, it's about empowering teams. It's about a more bottom-up approach. It's about approaches like peer review, where schools are working together, focusing on how they can improve rather than proving, to external accountability bodies being the main focus. It makes for a more porous, a more open, a more dynamic and a more learning focused organisation than one focused on a narrow set of results. So we think paradigm B education is what every child is entitled to. We think it's particularly important for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, because often children from more advantaged contexts get some of this paradigm B enrichment through their social networks, through their parents' networks and what they're exposed to. So it is a matter of equity, but we also think it matters for every single child, and it's a matter of entitlement. So that's what we think paradigm B is. To go into a little bit more detail, Ellie, if we may, on the head, heart and hand, which I mentioned. So what does head, heart, hand look like? We use that mantra quite a lot. So thanks, Ellie, if you just click the next one. So in terms of head, we're clearly talking there about academic learning. And that first top left-hand box there, cultural literacy, the best of what that has been thought and said. That is what dominates the sector, and we would say there's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely right that students experience that, but it's too narrow to suggest that that's the only thing, and that it's over-indexed in the way that we plan for and deliver our education, because that's what is taken to matter above all else. So yes, that matters, but it's one, as you can see where I'm going with this diagram, of 9 aspects that we think matter. So under academic learning, we have this, it's narrow, this way of thinking about it. It's much more nuanced, big ideas and concepts. How are young people actually wrestling with what sits behind the knowledge, the why, how does it fit together, the big ideas that dominate our life and shape the world. And then critically, how are academic subjects brought together? How do we apply knowledge, but how do we combine knowledge? It's not, we're obsessed with subject disciplinary knowledge, and those of you engage in these sort of curriculum debates, is obsessive subject of discussion, but to me it's just so myopic to think that there's not a power in bringing subjects together. We know that AI is a result of kind of big data and data science combined with insights from neuroscience and insights from biology and psychology. It's just not true to think that there are not additional there's not additional value to be gained from combining subjects. So that head is a layered, multi-aspect way of thinking about how we plan an academic curriculum. So thanks, Ellie. Then in terms of the heart, this is about developing yourself, developing your sense of yourself and your identity, but also how you work with and relate to others. So self-awareness, a critical part of that. How do you understand yourself? What we're doing today is an exact example of that, but how do we do that for young people? Understanding their place in the world, their identity, what it means to be them and their place in the world. Thinking about, we need to change that word for tolerance, Ellie, that I've just noticed it says tolerance there. We need to change that to celebration on our slide deck. We've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion training, and that's not what we want to see. That's not what we mean. So building relationships, how do we relate to one another? Love that quote, 2 ears and 1 mouth. So how do we exist in a community, be that the community of our school, the community we live in, a community of the world in which we inhabit? Ethics and meaning. So religious education, yes, but far beyond that, how are we in the world? What are our values? What underpins the choices that we make? So, and then in terms of hand, and incidentally, I think in terms of heart, you see that done, generally speaking, better in primary schools than secondary schools. So in terms of the balance of these things, there's quite a lot more good practice in terms of social and emotional learning in primary schools, and it tends to get sort of a bit more lost the older students get often. Then hand, actually, we think this is probably the least well developed in the sector as a whole. And that first block kind of beauty and discernment, rather ostentatious, but the arts critical part of this, so in and of themselves, the value of the arts, the process of creating art, and the appreciation of arts in the broadest sense, including music, dance, etc. And then learning to create. So creativity as a skill is something that everybody you talk to, I think, across sectors values and identifies is one of the things that differentiates us in the world of AI going forward. How do we, creativity is a process, it's a skill set, it's not to be taught in isolation, no, but it is something that we should intentionally create and support through all the sorts of processes, such as design thinking, that we know support people in those creative processes. And last but not least, changing the world. So work very closely with Citizens UK. It's linked very strongly in our own schools to our problem-based learning approach, where we are wrestling and supporting the children and young people to wrestle with real things in the real world that we work on and that they see they can make a real difference to. And give you many, many examples, ranging from a successful campaign that students at Surrey Square were involved in through Citizens, which was around paying for citizenship and particular loophole of certain children who were born in this country but where their parents didn't have certain immigration rights. They could become citizens, but they had to pay £1,000 per child to become a British citizen, even though they were born here. And that was a successful campaign that children and families were involved in fighting and going to Parliament, and that has been changed. So how can we actually help children and young people understand that they may feel very small in the concept of the world, but if you're intentional and skillful, you can make a difference and have a voice. So thanks, Eddie. We're going to the next slide. So that is my bit on big education. That red circle saying that's what the whole system at the moment is geared towards, and that just makes the point that it's so narrow. And what we're saying is that it's a both and. Yes, we do need those core skills and the basics and the knowledge rich curriculum, but it's not the only thing that matters. So Ellie, on to the next one. Really, the next thing to say is, as big education, that's what we believe, and we're thinking really hard and being in action really hard about what are the best ways to try and bring about that change. So we are doing that in our own schools, and trying to model that and continue to push our own practice of how we deliver an expansive education in our own context. We're opening new schools as well, where we will be doing that too. But we're also engaged, as I mentioned, the Rethinking Assessment, engaged in big programmes of work to try and make progress on some of the bits of the system which are have such a stranglehold on change and progress. We've also done a fantastic initiative which is called Learning from Lockdown. Sam might put that in the chat as well, so if you're interested, which is for us as change makers, the disruption of COVID, notwithstanding all the tragedy and hardship and loss, from the point of view of educational change makers, has been a fantastic opportunity and very exciting, because as change makers, partly what you're trying to do is find ways of disrupting the status quo to get people to think about things differently, and we can't say that we haven't had disruption. So we've been really keenly thinking about how do we capitalise on that, how do we get the learnings from that, how do we get people into that reflective state quickly and early on in the process of lockdown to think about what the insights are and what are the lessons for us as we go forwards from here. So let's transform from here and not revert back to the status quo. And finally, but definitely last but not least, our big insight is that in order to bring about this type of change, we need the leaders who will do that. As I said early on, almost everybody I speak to gets it. They agree with the paradigm B articulation. They're like, yeah, get it. But if they work in the education sector, they feel totally stuck. They feel totally stuck because of high stakes accountability, because of exams and the sheer challenge, particularly if they're working in very materially disadvantaged communities. It's bloody hard doing the day job. So it feels too risky and too difficult to go on this journey from A to B. So what we are trying to do is help people with the stepping stones to find ways to start on that journey or carry on that journey. And it starts with leadership. And so the Big Leadership Adventure, when I'll hand over to Ellie, is our intervention to support leaders who want to go on this journey, to empower them and skill them up and connect them to other adventurers to make that change happen. So over to Ellie.
Thank you, Liz. So today's focus is on the leadership that is required for this work to happen. So as Liz has said, the Big Leadership Adventure is a piece of the puzzle in achieving a big education. And we believe that leadership is a catalyst for the change that we need and want to see. And we ultimately need a shift in mindset and a shift in behaviours across the sector. The sector needs innovation, it needs creativity, we need to be asking bigger questions, and we also need to be creating the safety and the environments within our schools and our organisations to be able to ask those questions. And we need leaders also to be finding new solutions to the problems that they face, rather than recycling the same answers to the problems that they face in education. So accountability measures can mean that this work is difficult. So the Big Leadership Adventure really tries to address this. It's not a leadership program that's going to tell you how to manage your budget or how to manage a meeting. That work is important, but this program is very much about getting us out of our own education bubble to think and do things differently. And a huge part of the program is starting with yourself, which is what we're going to focus on today. So I've coined the phrase doing the inner work to do the outer work, which I love and think is really relevant to this program. So we will be focusing today on what are the behaviours of a leader that's striving to achieve a big education. And when designing this programme, we had to draw from other sectors. We had to look out to the business sector, who are further along in this work in innovation and creativity and doing things differently. And as I said, it's just so important that we're getting out of our own education bubble. So what is the leadership required for a big education? So how do we get from A to B? So that's our programme curriculum in the middle, and also our framework that guides our leaders on the programme, which we'll be exploring today. Yeah, this underpins the leadership we want to see in the sector and also what we're trying to develop through the programme. And we identified these behaviours through a piece of research that we conducted with Hannah Jepson, who some of you may know. She's a business psychologist and co-founder at LGBT Ed, who conducted a piece of research on how to develop forward-thinking leaders within the sector, and interviewed leaders on the Big Leadership Adventure and our big education schools, and also business leaders to develop this framework. So very quickly, of course, it's based under head, heart and hand. So the head is about kind of questioning the purpose of education, challenging the status quo, generating new thinking, and forming a coherent strategy along the way. The heart is about finding your authentic self, building a team around you that's going to do this work with you, and inspiring others, galvanizing others, bringing people along on this journey with you. And then the hand, we talk a lot about the importance of balancing thinking and doing. So leaders in education, they quite often will know that they want to do things differently, but don't necessarily know how to get there. Or they dive to a solution very quickly before actually thinking about it, the purpose behind it, and why we're doing it. So the hand is about being a designer, solving thorny problems and really understanding the problems, and having an impact. And we train our leaders in a design thinking toolkit, which is essentially around, it essentially develops leaders to sit with a problem a lot longer than they feel comfortable doing so, to really understand the problem. And that's a methodology that's heavily used within the business sector, and I know Fair Education Alliance also use this methodology to design new solutions within our schools. So we want to give you some time now to reflect on your own leadership in the context of a big education. So we'll send you the wheel very shortly, and we'd love for you to reflect on where you're at with this work and how COVID has affected that as well, because as we reflected earlier on, COVID has had a huge impact on our leadership, and it's important to contextualize that as well. So I want you to give yourself the permission to pause. You've carved this time out in your diary because you wanted to engage with Big Education and engage with the reflection wheel. So I want you to really give yourself this time. I want you to close your emails, close Slack, close down any distractions, and give yourself, if we give you until 10 past 2, I'm going to put the reflection wheel in the chat now. And I'd like you to engage with it, and then we'll come back together at 10 past 2 and we'll have some reflections. I'm just going to try and give me 1 second. I'll pop it in the chat.
I've popped a link in there, at least, and you've done it.
Amazing, thank you. And I will share my screen again now as well. So I'd encourage you to turn off your video as well if that will help you to engage and enjoy. Okay, we start to come back now. If you turn your cameras on so I know that people are back. Hopefully that didn't send you to sleep. It was quite relaxing, I found. Brilliant. Well, hope you found that useful. We're now going to go into some breakout rooms to do a bit of reflecting on that process. And we'd like you to reflect in threes. I've just updated the questions, so let me present again. So what was that process like of stopping and reflecting and giving yourself that time? If you're serious about a big education, what are the changes you would like to make to your leadership? And what conversations am I going to have next? So I think Gina or Sam are going to put us into breakout rooms now. And I'll also put those questions in. Oh, amazing. Thanks, Gina.
Sorry, Rosie and Payman, can you hear us okay? Okay, brilliant. Rosie, can you hear us okay? Rosie's just written that she's had to take a call. She'll try to get back to the session, so she might not be here.
Back to Sam and Gina. So I'd love to invite a couple of people who are feeling courageous, who maybe haven't spoken yet in the whole room even, to share some thoughts. What was that like? And any pledges, any bold statements of action or thoughts about what's next? Who would like to kick us off? Fiona Evans, I've got my eyes on you because I can see you, you know, and I know you well enough to call you out. So I don't know whether you're willing to start us off.
Absolutely. Our discussion was really nice. I do like the whole breakout room mechanism. It just is really nice, isn't it?
That space, it's so surprising, isn't it? Because it's no closer, but it does. I totally agree.
Really was. We had a really interesting conversation and focused in actually on the team building things. And well, so actually, first of all, we started off talking about the difference between management and leadership. And one of the bold statements in our group was how somebody was going to move very definitely into the leadership space, which again, a lot of self-awareness around that. And then we started looking at the team aspect of it. And we talked about how some of these things would be easier to achieve depending on the type of organisation you were with and the teams that you had. So that it's not necessarily always down to you, that the particular arena will determine your success to a degree potentially, or at least you need to be aware of that. Yes. But we also talked about how we can do, in terms of setting strategy, the challenges around bottom up and top down strategy development, and that actually if it's imbalanced in either of those, it's not effective. If you, as you mentioned at the beginning, if you've got strategy developed by, you know, leaders who are not listening to their people and think they have all the answers and don't, it's not effective. On the other hand, if you have lots and lots of upward interest and challenge, you can end up being a bit directionless. So we talked a little bit a while about actual genuine strategies we were going to look at to think about around that. So yeah, fascinating conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Fiona. I love that point that, you know, the context has such a big bearing on your own behaviour, and that's, you know, something to sit with and understand. And then we have our own personal choices within that context, including if the context means I can't behave with authenticity and how I want to behave, I need to get into a different context. Yeah, which is the nuclear option. Right, I think we've got one more minute if someone else would like to come in and share one more thing before we wrap up.
I'm very happy to go.
James?
Slightly linked to Fiona, and we were talking a little bit about bottom down, top up approaches, and from our side, we were quite a few middle managers in the room. So the trustees and the boards of charity have set a very good vision. And we also have volunteers who are already galvanized, have great passion. And it was trying to align those two and work out how to have those conversations in the middle where you're aware of the strategy, you're aware of the volunteers' passion, and how can we best align those two.
Right, so it's really interesting about kind of nuance and judgment sitting with two things being the case, and how do you navigate, you know, both of those things, and that's the real kind of, yeah, I think the sort of judgment part of leadership, isn't it, of being able to reconcile those things and lean into the complexity of two different things being true at the same time. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing, James. So thank you all. We're going to hand back to Gina and Sam. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and do connect if you were interested in what we were saying. I know they're going to do another plug for the Big Leadership Adventure, but generally if you're interested in what we're doing, Big Education, do connect with us. And yeah, we'd love to continue the conversation. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much, Ellie. Fantastic. I was just going to ask you to put that in the chat. Ellie, you beat me to it. So Big Leadership Adventure open until the 3rd of May for applications. And I highly recommend applying, because I'm not sure if the development center is the same, Liz and Ellie, but as part of it, you will do your leadership wheel and then get the chance to talk it through, which in and of itself, I had Peter Hyman, and having an hour with Peter Hyman, or however long it was, to chat through my own leadership wheel and get different questions and perspectives was in and of itself an incredibly valuable process. So highly recommend to apply, and you will definitely have an incredible experience of the development center and hopefully on the program as well. Two different things that I wanted to shout about before we do a poll is just, I've heard a few comments around leadership, and I just want to leave you with the thought of everybody as a leader. And that's so important when we think about collective action, collective voice, and the movement piece. I'm so happy to see you all on this call, and I hope that you can go back to your organizations with your authenticity and with impact in mind and having the greatest impact, to share this with them and to empower them and enable them to consider themselves as leaders despite the hierarchy potentially that exists within an organization. And the second thing that I want you to take away is around the comparison. And we had this amazing opportunity to say, you know, are we in flow, or are you right at the start of this? But I think it's really fascinating, not just about how you compare yourself with others, but also your own appetite and your own ambition. And I remember I scored quite low perhaps on authenticity. And I remember Peter saying to me, well, why? You seem very authentic. You know, why are you judging yourself so low? And it's like, well, actually, I can be really authentic within some groups, but when you actually go out onto perhaps more of a policy level, how do you change and adapt? But is that part of authenticity itself? So I think there's a really interesting question around like the relativity aspect of looking at this, and challenging our own assumptions that we hold about ourselves. So we're all here. There's an attendee list, which you've all consented, well, I hope you've consented to. Those who have consented are on it. So pick up the conversations, and hopefully you'll apply for this and get to join Liz and Ellie on the next cohort. So thank you, Liz and Ellie. We'll come off mute in just one moment. But before we do that, if we could just pull up a quick poll. Thanks, Sam. So if you wouldn't mind giving your feedback, we will send a survey on the 30th for your thoughts overall on the Impact Festival. But if you could just take a moment to let us know your thoughts about this session as well, please. Great, thank you so much. Can see those coming in, so I'll give you about a minute more. All right, great, thank you so much. So we have sessions next week. This is our last one from day 4 from this first week. Before I tell you about them really briefly, may I ask you to come off mute, Liz and Ellie. You can stay on mute and just hear the accolades that we have for you. So thank you so much to both of you for an inspiring.
Very much. Thank you. Lovely. Really lovely.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Fiona. Loved hearing you. If you're looking on the leadership wheel and want to develop your impact, we have a session around how to have the greatest impact during the pandemic next week with Impact Ed and Kalisa. If you're looking more on the paradigm D and wanting to really think about how we're recovering, but not just on the academic attainment, how we're focusing on the whole child, we have one led by the Country Trust on the opportunities over the course of the next year. So have a look at the timetable, and we cannot wait to see you next week. Thank you so much, everybody, for your leadership, for taking part in the collective movement, and have a great weekend.